Lovely people, welcome back to another Kolber's Corner for another fortnight, another go around. I'm joined today by Dr. Tom Porter, who's has just released a book called The Dance of Differentiation through Amber Press, and we're going to be talking about differentiation, his career, and sort of how it all comes to be existing in book form. So, Tom, how are you doing this evening?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Good, good. Do you want to give us a bit of a potted history of your career from teaching to what you're doing now and anywhere in
Yeah,
between?
yeah. Look, I've been teaching for the past decade, and at the beginning of the sort of 2010s, I started to become a teacher and did my undergrad. And I guess one of the things that I've always been really passionate about from my beginning teaching career is this idea of inclusive education and um, uh, making sure that in my class make sure that all of my students are included in everything that I do. And I guess one of the key things that struck me as I started to become a teacher is I noticed that a lot of teachers weren't necessarily including all of their students. And so that kind of passion to explore why teachers were why they differentiate or why they don't differentiate kind of followed me throughout my career and sort of led me into various leadership roles with inclusion and learning support, etc. And that kind of led me to do a PhD again to figuring out why teachers are inclusive and why they're not inclusive. Um, and yeah, I suppose I was a teacher for the past 10 years and really decided after at the middle of last year that I would sort of take the plunge into lecturing. So which I guess is a natural thing after doing a PhD, and had a bit of a desire to instill in future teachers how to be inclusive in their teaching, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. And so, career of how long in primary, secondary? What sort of a setting were you based in?
Yeah, so I was mainly in a secondary setting. I worked, I'm from Adelaide and worked across a range of schools. So I did a few secondary schools, a few co-ed R to 12, but my main area that I used to teach was nutrition and psychology. So I was, yeah, as I said, classroom teacher for a number of years, and then I ended up becoming head of the South Australian Certificate of Education at one of my schools, and helping manage senior secondary students' pathways and the subjects that they chose for university, etc. So, yeah, I guess a decade of classroom teaching with a mixture of leadership. Yeah.
Gotcha. And nutrition and psychology, how does that come to be the combination? You might be the first I've ever heard say
Yeah,
that.
it's kind of interesting. South Australia is quite well known for having sort of very different subjects to some of the eastern states. So I actually majored in biology and psychology, and never taught biology as you tend to with a teaching career. You major and minor in some things, and you teach other things. And yeah, I guess nutrition sort of just came about quite randomly, and it was something that I fell in love with. Just I guess I think from memory it was like a small contract that they needed to fill, and I said, "Yep, I'll do it." And yeah, I ended up teaching that for 10 years, and then I think it was just as COVID was about to hit, my school said to me, "Oh, do you want to teach business?" And I thought, I've never taught business in my life ever. I'm not a business teacher. And I ended up doing that and writing a textbook. So yeah, I guess a weird kind of subject choice career, I suppose. I've always been one to just say yes and experience new subjects, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. And I'm sure you're probably good at this sort of spiel at this point, but if you're selling inclusion, differentiation
Yes.
to teachers, what's the why? And I must say, I've had similar roles at various points, so
Yes.
I was echoing with a lot of things in the book. But yeah, what's the sell for teachers? Why? Why should I care?
I guess it's just about a sense of belonging, that we should really care because we want everyone in society to feel a sense of belonging as a human being. And that's what I think it comes down to in its most simplest form, is just making sure that all of our students just have that sense of belonging. And that no one is missing out or no one is being exempt from good quality learning. And I guess the why is it's just about equity. It's about making, and I mean, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure many parents wouldn't want their child to not be included. They want their children to be included in everything possible. We would never want to single someone out. And I guess that's the same in classrooms, that it's just about equity and it's about having everyone included for a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and that leads into students having a sense of belonging in community and in society. So, yeah, I think that would be my sell, I suppose.
And so you said it sort of always followed you through your career. I
Yeah.
don't like in my experience, it was kind of something that our department gave me a scholarship and I went off and did some type of degree in teaching
Mm.
ASD students, which probably isn't the right nomenclature anymore, but whatever. Oh no, it was teaching students ASD, which very much sounds wrong now because it's teaching them how to do that.
Yeah.
But so right from the start of your career, that was something that was a passion for you. Like, how does that, was there something in your past or your background that sort of
Yeah.
informed it,
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, I guess so I grew up with a cousin who had a disability and in a wheelchair, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability. And as a young teenager, started to see that she was included in everything. Sports days, people would help her, run races with wheelchairs and in her wheelchair, and everything was accessible for her, even though the learning might have been a little bit less challenging for her. They still held high expectations of her. And so I guess that was a real thing that sort of stuck with me, that, well, why are we still seeing in classrooms many students not being included? Or as I started to become a teacher, and especially when I became a head of inclusion, I just noticed so many teachers were saying to their students with learning needs, "Oh, go over into the corner and do a work booklet, or do a booklet, and I'm going to teach my class." And I guess that kind of angered me, because I sort of thought, well, it's challenging to include every student in the classroom, but it's not out of reach, And so with a bit of effort and a bit of training, we should be able to help our students belong in a classroom and not be exempt from that learning experience. So I guess the passion was from a young age, seeing that it's possible, and that I guess it's just a burn in me that wants everyone to be included and have a good schooling experience, and also have from that experience better outcomes, because we know that if students aren't included in the schooling experience, that they don't have a sense of belonging, then they're less, or end up having difficulties in their learning, then they're less likely to get jobs, and then they're less likely to participate in society. So I guess that all kind of culminated in this want and this passion to make sure that teachers are including their students.
Hmm. And I'm interested in your experience. When I was in this sort of learning disability space, like, inclusion rather than whatever I just said, it did seem like the majority of people studying in that field did have some sort of connection to someone that they felt was underserved or those sort of things. Is that what
Yeah.
you found as well, or was?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even when I was lecturing at a previous university to the one that I'm at now, they had a specific degree for Bachelor of Inclusive Education, and most of the students there had some sort of either lived experience or family member of someone who struggled. It wasn't just necessarily disability. It might have been trauma, it might have been socioeconomic status, but there was always that kind of lived experience. Yeah.
Hmm. Which, yeah, to me that makes me wonder if we should be broadening within an ITE setting, broadening students' understanding a little bit as well,
Yeah.
because you know, I'll keep circling back to, in my degree, it was like, oh, now we're going to a SDS school. And if
Yes.
you had have asked me even what that was, I couldn't have even guessed.
Mm,
ASD specific schools,
mm,
obviously, I don't know, I guess society sort of tucks them away, like they're never sort
yes.
of on main roads or those sort of things. But
Yes.
I do think I don't think it's probably good enough that the only people, well, the majority of people learning, researching in this area are just those who have some direct
Yes.
personal family connection. I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
we could be doing a better job of, I don't know, on taking teachers to placements other than, do you want to be a secondary or a primary school teacher? And it's like, those are the two choices.
Yes. Yeah.
And
No,
it's
I
like
agree.
whispered, there's also these other layers that I know most teachers don't know. Could you, and obviously from your setting, but talk us through like the other types of schools that are around other than your primary, secondary, early childhood, uni?
Yeah, I guess in South Australia at the moment we've got mainstream schooling. We do have some special schools, and I think and don't quote me on this. I think that there is a view that eventually that the special schools will no longer exist in a very long period of time, and that all students will be part of the mainstream school. We do have some specialist schools, so some science and math schools, some sports schools and things like that. Which again, I'm certainly not opposed to that. We've even got some gifted schools, but I don't know. I guess for me, I do think that if teachers have the right skills and the right repertoire and the right mindset and attitudes and have confidence in what they're doing, then we can include everyone regardless of the label that they have. And I think you mentioned about ITE and students. We need to strengthen that area so that everyone is aware of what inclusion is and things like that. And I guess that comes down to dispelling the misconceptions. I think there's been a real misconception that inclusion is just for students with disability. And at the end of the day, we all want to be included. We're all diverse. We all have different backgrounds, cultural, language, skills and capabilities, etc. And I think we've got to kind of change the language that we've got to include, we can't say, oh, it's about including students with disability in the mainstream classroom. It's just about everybody, and not worrying so much about the label that is attached to some people, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. And in terms of differentiation as a concept, do you find the majority of teachers you've worked with or teachers that you're training or, whatever the case may be, that they're on board with the concept of differentiation? Because, I feel like at times people seem to have the impression, oh, that's a bit too hard, or, I'll be making
Yeah.
3 worksheets instead of 1 and those kind of things.
Yeah. I
What,
think
what, what impression do you find?
in my experience, you definitely see resistance to differentiation from a lot of teachers. Some teachers embrace it really well. In my experience, many teachers will say that it is too difficult to do and too time consuming. And again, I think it comes down to the fact that it's in a lot of literature and not just in Australia but worldwide, it's really not clear what differentiation is. So a lot of teachers hold really poor or they have misconceptions as to what it actually is. They'll often associate differentiation as being something that they should do for an individual student, or that differentiation is for someone with a disability. And I think even when I talk about it in my book, I held those misconceptions too, that differentiation, I've got to differentiate for my student with autism or for my student with a learning disability. But that's where I guess it becomes difficult because teachers find it too hard because they don't have a good understanding of what it actually is. And I think that the first step to improve that is to really have a common grounding for what differentiation is. It certainly takes time and it does take effort. And I guess there is a little bit of an uncomfortableness to it to start to differentiate, but it's a bit like riding a bike, whereas I use the dance metaphor in my book. The more you practice and the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature.
Hmm. And I guess, yeah, once you're doing it well, it's less about more of things and more just like having a coherent vision for education, right? Like,
Yeah,
a lot of the things you described, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, this sounds doable. Like
yeah,
it's not the classic 3 worksheets, 1 for low, 1 for medium, 1 for high. It's like,
yes.
no, if you're doing good teaching, you're doing good differentiation almost.
Yeah, that's right. It really is just good. It is just good teaching. And I think in an ideal world, we shouldn't even really call it differentiation. It actually just is good teaching to constantly figure out where your students are at and adapt the way that you teach them. And that's kind of what it really is in its most simplest form.
Mm, yeah, definitely. And talk us through the process of it becoming a book. How did that fall within your career? Like, was that a mid-teaching or post-teaching? How did it sort of slot into the career?
I guess for me, I'd always thought about the idea of doing a book, and I guess the PhD kind of came first. The drive to want to investigate why teachers do and do not differentiate, and I really wanted to, in my PhD, look at senior secondary because there's often those teachers feel constrained by curriculum, by exams. And so I guess that was, I guess, a bit of a prelude to wanting to do a book. And after finishing a PhD, I sort of wanted to create something for teachers, by a teacher for a teacher, because often you see a lot of academic research, gets put into the atmosphere and it never really gets used, or it never gets accessed by teachers and schools. And we know that that's a really common thing, that they don't often draw upon a lot of research. And so I wanted to make more of a practitioner book, but I didn't want to create something that was telling them what to do. I didn't want to, I wanted them to know from my experiences and my challenges to be able to learn from that. So it is something that's always been on my mind, but it really wasn't until the end of last year, actually. And I guess I'm a bit of a fast writer, that I had decided to do this, but it actually fell into place so easily for me because I had so many experiences and different exemplars of things that went well and things that didn't go well, that it actually came together quite quickly. And I wanted something that, again, wasn't a textbook and it wasn't telling them what to do, but it was a reflective thing that they could almost, if by following the book, they could get some initial steps to get them on their journey of differentiation, I suppose.
Mm. And I guess one thing I really enjoyed was the sort of like starting from the curriculum, which I think even that, like your average teacher wouldn't, you know, you
Yeah,
might open the
yeah.
curriculum, when they say, oh, we're getting a new XYZ curriculum coming in, and you'd look through it and you'd pick out some dot points and,
Yes.
reword them or whatever, or dumb them down or dot point them, or, we're always putting things into new boxes for no
Yeah.
reason. And then, what do students know, understand, and do? It's like, yeah, okay, these are all doable kind of clear steps that we can do.
Mm,
Um, and your reflections of kind of here's how I've fallen short, in my career, I
mm.
think was also really refreshing because like there's a tendency, as you said, to be kind of, I finished my PhD, so let me just throw my PhD into
Yeah,
nine
yeah.
chapters and call it a book. Um, Yeah, and I would like I think I messaged you about this as well. It's like the clarity of references, like it was Tomlinson who differentiation, and is it
Yes.
Linda Graham? I could be wrong, but
Yeah, it's just the kind of inclusionista, more about inclusion than differentiation. But yes, yeah,
mm. And so
yeah.
it wasn't like, oh, there's 100 million different references. It was like I finished the book and was like, okay, well, if I want to read more, I'm going to read your papers, which you've cited in it.
Mm.
Linda Graham and Tomlinson. Cool. That's
Yes.
it. Like it's
Yeah.
clear cut. It's not like go out and read a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of whatever.
Yeah.
Was that true of your PhD as well?
Yeah, I guess in a PhD, you kind of you're delving so deep into a topic and quite a narrow topic, and so I guess the whole point of a PhD is to become a bit of an expert. And I hate saying that I'm some expert in differentiation because I still don't feel like I know everything that I need to. But I guess when I was writing this book, I wanted to make clear that I was drawing upon literature, but not I didn't want to write a PhD as a book, put it that way, but I did want to know, I did want the readers of this book to know that I know what I'm talking about, and I know, and that other people have different points of view, and to draw on those references and those experiences and literature. And that's why I wanted to find a happy medium between a book that wasn't just a reflection, but also had some rigor, I suppose, to it.
Mm. And so talk us through the PhD. What was the topic? So it was secondary. differentiation
Yeah.
at sort of the non-compulsory 11 and 12 sort of years?
Yeah, so my PhD in its simplest form was looking at teachers' attitudes towards differentiation and teacher self-efficacy. So I wanted to look and this was specifically for teachers who teach year 10, 11, and 12, so the senior secondary years, where there was kind of a bit of a big gap in research. We know that a lot of primary teachers differentiate. We know that as the years go up, that teachers tend to do it less, but there wasn't really much in senior secondary in Australia. And I wanted to look at why they chose to differentiate or not. I wanted to look at their attitudes, so whether they believed in inclusion, whether they believed in differentiation. And then I wanted to look at whether they felt like they could differentiate. So I explored their challenges, the things that that enabled them to differentiate well, and the things that they found challenging in doing so. So yeah, that was it's the real crux of what I investigated. So I did a lot of interviews with some teachers across a few states in Australia to sort of really drill down into their perspectives of why they do and do not differentiate.
Right. In terms of methodology, like big survey, big how'd you do it basically?
Yeah, no, I ended up doing a series of case studies, so about 12 case studies on some individual teachers with some interviews, and I collected some of their planning documents. So I, in some instances, collected unit plans or lesson plans from each of those 12 people to really look at, were they planning for differentiation? Were they saying that they were differentiating, but then that wasn't in their planning document? So I was trying to look a lot at, do they plan for it? Do they follow that plan? Do they not consider differentiation in their planning, or do they do it on the fly? And yeah, I guess I found some quite interesting things, and I think one of my main key findings that I found were that teachers often differentiated for students with learning difficulties, learning disabilities, and they could differentiate quite well, or they could plan for differentiation quite well when a student had a label. So if they had dyslexia or if they had autism, they knew that they needed to put in some certain strategies for those particular students. Which was good. It was good to know that they could, say, oh, I've got 3 students with dyslexia. I know that I need to do X, Y, Z. But the downside of that is that it didn't lead to really good responsive differentiation and lots of assumptions being made that, the students with dyslexia, for example, all need a scaffold. Well, we know that they don't all need that, or that the student with ASD needs written instructions. And again, we know that they don't all need that, or making assumptions that the students with learning disabilities were the dumb students. And so, while it was really good to find that they were guided by these labels, it kind of highlighted the point that we want to be educating teachers about checking for students' understanding beyond the label. That, just because you have dyslexia doesn't mean that you're always in the low end group per se.
Gotcha. And then between the book and the PhD, you got publications in there. So how did you sort of manage to fit all this in? This sounds like you're either highly effective or we're talking a longer time scale than I'm imagining.
I guess I don't sleep a lot, to be honest. And I do. I don't know. I work well under pressure. I was working full time at doing my PhD, and I guess there was a point in time, and I remember it quite vividly, that I kind of decided that academia was where I wanted to go. I think I love school teaching, and I think one day I'd love to be a principal. But there was a point where I thought, actually, my passion really lies in helping future teachers to be inclusive. So I guess that kind of stemmed me to get some publications out there. So most of my publications at the moment are from my PhD, so smaller snippets from my PhD, looking at some key things. So I think my latest article was about the impact of labels and what that means for differentiation. But then I also looked at, or I've got another article that's hopefully coming out soon about the teachers that taught mathematics as part of my PhD and what that means for teaching differentiation in mathematics. So yeah.
Okay. And of those, which has been, you know, which has been most cited, or those sort of things? What kind of?
It's quite funny. I think my first article, which was I focused purely on one of the school, of four teachers, one school, and just purely outlined their experiences with differentiation, their challenges, their enablers. And that one's been the most cited, but that's probably because it's been out the longest. But I think I'm predicting that the article that I would hope would have the most impact is the one about labeling, about getting teachers to move beyond this understanding of labels and just checking for students' understanding, no matter where they and no matter whether they have autism or they're low SES or they've got English as a second language, that kind of putting that to the back of the mind and just checking for where they're at regardless. I think that article, I think that will be my strongest article, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I always found when trying to speak to teachers about these things, like you'd ask the most basic questions, like what does ASD stand for, or
Yes.
what is an ILP?
Yeah.
You kind of have teachers scratching their heads, going, like you'd really, put them under quite strict requirements.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe that was the wrong approach, as you say. Like it's not really about, as you say, well, okay, I've got this number of letters in front of me
Mm.
for a diagnosis, so then I should consult the ILP or IEP that just
Yeah.
says use these generic strategies
Yes.
on these letters, and then that will solve it. Like, yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
how would you do it? Because they need to know what the diagnosis means for
Yeah.
starters, but then they also then need to forget it and
Yeah.
go with what they're good at. I don't know.
I guess it comes down to that differentiation is different from reasonable adjustments that in the classroom. And this is like I think this is something that teachers really struggle with because again, they often associate differentiation as something that you might do, once or twice for some select students. And they forget that or they don't know that differentiation is something that really is a philosophy that should just be good teaching for all students. And that there will be students who have, learning disabilities or learning or physical disabilities or whatever it is. And those students may need reasonable adjustments to be able to access the differentiated classroom. And that's where those individual students get a little bit more. They might need some individual scaffolding. They might need some written things turned into video, or they might have the option of being able to present their work in a multimedia way versus a written way. And so that's a reasonable adjustment. If it's helping certain students with who meet the criteria for a disability to access the classroom, then they're two very different things. And again, a lot of teachers will often think that differentiation is a reasonable adjustment. And I guess my encouragement to teachers is to think about differentiation as whole school, whole class, and that as you kind of move up in the tier of what we call the tiers, reasonable adjustments goes beyond the whole class and is for individual students.
Gotcha. I'm fully understanding everything you're saying, but I'm also conscious that other people might not be.
Yeah.
So talk to us about reasonable adjustment. Like that's a key phrase in sort of the disability
Yes.
literature.
Yeah.
And again, that's something I've at various points summarized for teachers as well. But talk us
Yes.
through what is reasonable adjustment and perhaps what's unreasonable adjustment and where does all that kind of language come from?
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing, and I guess the language is kind of born. I don't know if back in the late 90s, there was a case of a young girl with spina bifida. Her name was Scarlett Finney. Not sure if you heard of her. And she wanted to go to a school, and the school denied and said, nope, you're not coming to our school. And the parents sort of found out why. And in the end, the school was found to have discriminated because they never really consulted with the parents about the needs of Scarlett to be able to maneuver the school. They just automatically said no. And it went to court. I think it even went to the High Court in the end. And from this case was really born the disability standards for education, where within that it sort of said quite loosely that schools can't discriminate anymore. They need to show that they can put in adjustments for students to help them access the physical environment, the curriculum. It might be school camps, etc. And so that was around about, I think, 2005 that those standards came in. And now we kind of have the reporting system of the nationally consistent collection of data that talks about, again, that schools have to report on the adjustments. And so I guess a reasonable adjustment is anything that a school can put into place or that a teacher can put into place that allows access to students to the curriculum, that allows them to access to the classroom. I guess an example would be if you've got a student with a physical disability and they need to, get to level 2 or 3, a reasonable adjustment would be putting in a lift, to get to that level. An unreasonable adjustment, and this is just one example, would be if that lift was going to bankrupt that whole school. And again, we wouldn't really see that, but a school could say, well, it's unreasonable for us to do that because then our whole school is going to not exist. That's a really extreme example, but a reasonable adjustment should be something that's consulted with parents and students, and a school really has to do that. They have to show that they can put those things into place, unless it's going to cause some sort of burden to them, be financially, etc.
And I guess even in the case where, we can't afford the lift, it'd be, we'll put the student on the first floor.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. And you mentioned the tiers. So we're thinking
Yes.
response to intervention, or
Yep.
RTI.
Yep.
What are the 3 tiers? And I'm asking especially because I always stuff them up and flip them around. Even when I've been asked to lecture on it, I was like very confidently like, yeah, tier 3's the bottom or the top. And then I'm like, wait, let me check my own slides. So what are the tiers? What's response to intervention? How's all
Yeah.
that work?
I guess we've got response to intervention is what we would consider more of the academic side of things. And so we have these 3 tiers of tier 1, 2, and 3 for response to intervention. And that was a framework really geared towards academics. And then we had this other framework, positive behaviour support, which was all about behaviour. And that also had tier 1, 2, and 3. And from that was born the multi-tiered systems of support, because we recognize that learning or academic achievement is also tied with behavior. And so we have this triangle, and this tier 1 is really what we consider for everyone. So good teaching practice, good quality differentiated classrooms allow for good tier 1, is part of tier 1. Good behaviour management strategies, good classroom expectations being set are all tier 1. And what we know with tier 1 is that if we have a good differentiated classroom, we've got clear behaviour expectations, teachers follow through with those expectations, that we should see less students moving into what we call tier 2 and tier 3. However, we know that we have students in tier 2, and they're the students that perhaps not responding to a differentiated classroom. They might need, again, reasonable adjustments being put into place. They might need some intervention. So they might need a little bit more attention, let's say in phonics, for example, or in a particular concept. And so the teacher provides a little bit more, I don't want to call it one-on-one, but it's more group support. whether it's behavior or academics. For behavior, in that instance, we might see, again, more of a check-in and check-out system, just to keep an eye on some students. Whereas tier 3 is really, again, what we would consider a minute number of students. So if we think about the multi-tiered systems of support as a triangle, it's around about 2 to 5% sit in the tier 3. I think the tier 2 was about 10 to 15% from memory. It varies in the literature. But tier 3 is really when we've got students who are working significantly below their academic year level. They may likely have an intellectual disability. It might be a student in year 10 who's working at, say, a year 2 level and really needs a modified curriculum. And again, modified is very different from a differentiated curriculum. We might see students who have individual learning plans to access parts of the curriculum. And in terms of behavior, we would see students who have really complex and challenging behavior. That's really more intense, could also be considered quite dangerous to their peers or to the teacher. And that requires a good understanding of functional behavior, of figuring out why some students do certain behaviors and why they're triggered, and trying to reduce the trigger. But it's a real minority of students there.
Gotcha. So sort of for listeners, picture your healthy food triangle. You've got your tier 1s, your kids that, all things being equal, should do okay. Tier 2, they might need small group either in or out of class, either they're removed or you're working with them. And tier 3 might need one-to-one or, an altered setting or scenario maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And that's true for behavior and for academic skills both?
Yeah. So that response to intervention and that positive behavior support triangle kind of molds into this multi-tiered system, which is quite heavy in, there's in the literature. So someone like Kate de Bruin from Monash does a lot of research in multi-tiered systems of support. So it's a relatively, I think a lot of schools are starting to adopt more of this and understand more about this, because a lot of schools typically have relied on more punitive measures like, suspensions and expulsions and things like that. And I think that they're realizing that if they have good tier 1 practices, that in most cases, if that's effective and it's whole school, which is a lovely dream, the reality is not always the same, then we should see less problem behaviors. We should see less gaps in learning.
And it might be different where you are in Adelaide, but in Melbourne, at least, it was sort of, there was people in a similar position to me and perhaps you as well, which was like, we knew this theory, we knew the tiers, I didn't know the multi-tiered, I'll be honest, until just now. I'm catching up on the up-to-date literature. But we knew about this kind of thing, and, head of literacy and head of numeracy would sort of be aware of these things. But it wasn't until for us, like COVID, and then post-COVID, we had the tutor program, which basically was like a lot more bodies in schools that we were like, oh, we can actually do the tiers. Whereas before it was like you'd hear a lecture on it and you go, yeah, great, but we don't have enough people to do that. We don't have specialists. We don't have anything. And then the tutor initiative was like, yeah, you can do small group, you can do one-to-one. You just need to decide who your kids are and what tier they're in, and then we're good. Have you seen any changes like that, COVID or post-COVID or anything where you're at?
I think, I think what I've seen a lot in schools, even schools that work with the tiers, is that they'll often assume that some students are in tier 2 and they'll go, right, we need to pull them out of the class to work with a teacher, with a teacher's aide. And it's very much an integration model and kind of goes against inclusion. And I think we're starting to realize, or a lot of schools are starting to realize, that it can be done in a classroom, with a teacher's aide can be in the class, and not just geared towards helping students with learning needs. They can be helping the high achievers while the teacher helps some of the students who struggle. And so I think we're starting to see, it's a slow shift, a move away from this model of integration, of pulling kids out of the class, because what we actually know is that if students are exposed to good curriculum and good tier one, that they make gains in their progress. And we know that inclusion, like from decades and decades of research, I think since the 70s, we know that inclusion works and that it does improve academic outcomes along with other things for students with learning needs, learning disabilities, and those without. So I think we're slowly seeing a shift. I know at one of the schools I worked at, we worked really hard to move away from pulling kids out of classrooms so that they are still in the class, still exposed to the teacher and the classroom. But we're not there yet. We are still seeing a lot of students being pulled out of classes, having one-to-one, having small groups, some intervention. So we're kind of on the shift, but we're not there yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you can imagine sort of in that sort of a withdrawal tutor model, it's like, let's take the student out of the space with the most highly qualified person,
Yeah, that's
teacher,
right.
and we'll take
Yes.
them to the comparatively less qualified tutor who may have
Yeah.
been a teacher or may not yet be a teacher. And then
Yeah.
they can go and, you know, in theory, potentially receive a lower level of
Yeah.
instruction, but in a smaller group setting. And it's kind of
Yeah.
balancing that out. But and I'm
Definitely.
not up to date, but the one time that I did read up on kind of the effectiveness of tutors, and I've forgotten the gentleman's name at Monash, but you know, you probably know him better than me. Um, he did all of the work I read at the time when I did it about tutors was sort of uh, a little bit, you know, not as positive as you would think, you know, like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know one of John Hattie's big things at one point was like the more bodies, more adults in schools has not had a positive impact.
Mm.
And you know, obviously, anecdotally as well, you can picture the tutor, you know, squished right next to the kid who needs the most help, kind of
Yeah.
almost as a blocker or a barrier for the teacher.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
what's state of the art around tutors as well as you know, up to this point, you're way ahead of me, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think oh, I can't remember her name. Claire Jackson, she's just done a PhD in looking at teacher aides and how they work. And I haven't read her full PhD, but I know that she's got some good findings. But you're exactly right. We know that pulling kids out of the class to work with a teacher's aide, it does kind of baffle me a bit that we're putting some students with the least qualified person. But we also know that creates attitudinal problems because teachers end up going, I can't deal with those students, and I'll use the term those students, might be problem students, might be students who are strugglers. And then they end up exiting those students from the classroom to go and work with a teacher's aide. And so they develop really negative attitudes towards these students, or they do a bit of a diffusion of responsibility where they go, they're not my problem. The teacher aide will deal with them, and I can get on and teach the rest of my class. So good teachers' aides can actually make or break, and we know from research can really make or break a class. And I think, in my opinion, and I think what we're starting to see is that a good teacher's aide should be in a classroom, should be working with the teacher, planning with the teacher, be directed by what the teacher wants, and do those things, and move around the classroom and work with students and not just sitting one-on-one with some students, singling them out. And that's where I think we have to have a shift of what is the responsibility of a teacher aide. I think at the moment, and I would say this quite loosely in Australia, they're often employed for students with learning disabilities, or funded for students with learning disabilities or physical disabilities, whatever it is. But that doesn't help with the inclusion, the fight for more inclusion. Yeah.
Mm, gotcha. And just to fact check myself, the researcher I'm thinking of is Umesh Sharma. So
Yeah, and in
just
fact, he was Claire's supervisor. So yes, yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah.
Wait, Claire being who? Catch me up.
Claire Jackson, who I briefly mentioned, she just did her PhD in teacher aids,
Yeah,
and
right. Okay, gotcha.
the effective use of teacher aids. So yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned in passing positive behavior support or PBS. And
Yes.
again, similar to the differentiation inclusion space, I feel like
Yeah.
that's you might have one champion or two for it in a school, or maybe
Yeah,
the year level coordinators are big on it and everyone else sort
yeah.
of is a bit fuzzy on it. What's positive behavior support? How's that all work?
Oh, look, I guess, and I'm no expert in positive behavior, but I guess if we think about it in tiers, it's very similar to what we talk about in terms of differentiation, reasonable adjustments, modified curriculum. It's very similar in that, if you've got good whole school expectations, if you're able to follow through with those expectations, if you've got good classroom expectations, well set up rules that students are aware of, that you uphold those rules, that you have, I don't like to use the word consequences, but that you have some, I guess, it's not the right word, not consequences, not punishments, but some reprimand for when students, engage in those behaviors that you don't want to see or that you've agreed upon. That's a good tier one, because if students are all aware of it, they know what the expectations are, they know that teachers will follow through, then again, most behavior problems shouldn't really occur. But again, that's easier said than done. To have every teacher on the same board, on the same board as one another, all following through on expectations is a difficult thing in itself. And to have a school that or leadership team that supports that is another challenge. But that's sort of our tier one, whereas our tier two really moves into, you've got some students who perhaps are displaying some challenging behavior every now and again. Then they require a little bit more one-on-one. They might need some more check-ins. They might have the year level coordinator. And through those check-ins or those conversations with parents or the student, with really outlining those expectations, again, should be able to move back into tier one. Whereas tier three students are students who are displaying really challenging behavior. They might be throwing chairs. They might have certain repetitive behaviors that could be dangerous. They typically are students who aren't responding to tier one, they're not responding to tier two, and really require more of an individualized approach. They might have outside agencies coming in to work with them to help them to understand what their triggers are for their behavior. They're working with teachers. So similar to the academic kind of triangle that we were talking about. I can't remember the name now, but very similar with behavior.
Gotcha. So I've got a clear picture. We've got our triangle, our healthy food pyramid type shape.
Yeah.
We've got our RTI, PBS, academics. We've got all these multi-tiers inside
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And where's differentiation? If I'm mapping it to our little food pyramid, is it across all three tiers, or is it mostly in tier one? Is it an
Most
umbrella? I don't know.
it's a
How's it all
tier
work?
one. It's a tier one. It's just a whole class, whole school, good teaching. That's where it sits. And again, if it's done well, if it's done right, less students should be moving into the tier two and tier three. And but we know that classrooms will have some well, they will have tier two students. They may have one tier three student. That's where our reasonable adjustments come in. So on top of a differentiated classroom. So a good differentiated classroom, which is tier one, really should be a teacher who collects data on their students, uses that data to then change the way they teach for certain groups of students. It might mean that they work with students who are struggling with a particular concept. Or they work with the higher achievers, or they work with students who have particular interests to one another, or students who might want to demonstrate what they know in a certain way to other students. So it really is just a good teaching to be responsive to where your students are at certain points in time.
Gotcha. And shifting back to labels, and you might not like the framing, but your average teacher would say, well, the labels are increasing. A lot
Yes.
of my students have post-nominals, they're ADHD, ASD,
Yep.
OCD, blah, 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 blah. There's more labels than before. There's a lot to be aware of.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How
Yeah,
do labels, what role do they play?
I guess like that, I'm kind of in two minds with it because labels do guide teachers. And again, my research kind of picked that up that, again, a teacher will look at their class list and they might see that they've got 4 students with dyslexia. So they might go, great, I know I need to put in a scaffold for those students. And so some sort of adjustment is certainly better than no adjustment. If a teacher's putting in scaffolds for the 4 students with dyslexia, it's certainly better than nothing. But not all of those students will need that. And so the label kind of puts a blanket level of adjustment for teachers. They make assumptions that all ASD students need something, or all dyslexia students need something, or all students who struggle with literacy shouldn't do any reading. And so it can be quite damaging to think, to box students in labels in one of my articles and in my PhD, box students in. If a teacher just solely focuses on the label, then they end up with these boxy groups, or they end up with, I'll just I'll group my students with autism together, and I'll group my students with dyslexia together. And so my argument, or what I believe in, is that if we can enhance our teachers' skill to assess where students are currently at, and we call that readiness, how ready they are to learn something. If teachers can develop skills in that, then we shouldn't really need the label. We might need some reasonable adjustments for some students, but it might be that one of the ASD students has a really good, for example, good understanding of the difference between a plant and an animal cell. But then in the next lesson, when we start to look at some of the parts of an animal cell and we've assessed our students, that same student might have a lower readiness level. And so then the label becomes void a little bit, because we're just we're gathering evidence on where our students are at, and we're making those changes or adaptations to our lesson based on those things. So I guess to answer your question, a label is okay and a label guides to a certain point, but it shouldn't be what drives the adaptations that you make in your classroom.
Gotcha. I think for me, where I landed was almost like, because you'd be learning the most up to date. Okay, well, now when we're talking about ASD, we would never say low functioning, high functioning,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I would then go back to my school, and if someone's going to go teach my class the next period, and they're like, okay, tell me about the kids, and
Mm.
in the hallway conversation, I say, there's an ASD kid and he's high functioning. That's better than good luck. There's nothing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but in the same way, like I would never write that on a report or say that
No.
in any other context. But
Yes.
to say, there's 3 kids with ASD, they'll sit at the back, like you'll know where they are. Like that's
Yeah.
in that time sensitive a thing that's useful. But yeah, for me as a teacher, you wouldn't want me to just be walking around going, I'll go talk to as you said, I'll go to the ASD table where all the ASD
Yeah.
kids are,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
don't, and then, I'll write their report and say, they're still not good at group work.
Yeah.
Try harder next year, like it just have
Yeah.
the same, I don't know. Yeah. So it's sort of, yeah,
Yeah.
for their
I think
teacher, you'd hope it's not a big thing, but for,
yes.
as a starting point, start of the year might be useful, and then it hopefully should fall away, maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I guess, inclusion, when we're talking about what inclusion is, it's just recognizing that we are all different, regardless of whether you've got a learning disability. I might be really good at statistics for a few weeks of what we're learning about. And then when we move to fractions, that might not be something that I'm very skilled at. And so I guess the labels are a little bit boxy, and then that kind of, from what I can see, is that does create a bit of a diffusion of responsibility. I've got my ASD students who they've got ASD, therefore they need more support. Therefore, I will put them with the teacher aide, and they will leave my class. And then I have my class of no one with learning needs. And it's not reality in classrooms now that needs are everywhere. We've all got different needs, regardless of whether we have a learning disability or not.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. As we round in on the hour, your book begins as every presentation I've ever seen on differentiation or inclusion is, with the classic cartoon of, you know,
Yes, the
we're
fish.
measuring a fish by how well it climbs a tree, or, I
Yeah.
don't know. Is that a requirement of every book and every presentation in this field?
I think my book in particular, I guess with presentations is, we've got to. I used to be one of those, as I was starting to teach future teachers, I would often say, teachers just want to know how to teach. They just want to know what to do, tell them what to do. And then as I started to delve deeper, I realized that, we can train monkeys or animals what to do, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And it's the same in this context. I thought I could write this great book on how to differentiate, but that doesn't actually tell us why, And so that chapter or that first part with the image of the fish is to understand the why, to understand that differentiation comes back to inclusive education, that differentiation is just one of a of a number of different pedagogies that form inclusive education, and is just a minute, I guess we call it a bit of a microsystem of inclusion. That inclusion and inclusive education is, community, it's schooling structures, it's school leadership. And so it really, the idea of that first chapter is just to position differentiation as one part of inclusion and one way to achieve equity in classrooms.
Gotcha. And just explain the dance of differentiation. Why the dance? How was it at some point called the, I don't know, something else, the cycling of differentiation? How did you get on that metaphor in
Yeah, I
particular?
guess I don't know. I can't remember why I thought of dance, to be honest, but I just wanted to find a metaphor that wasn't just me talking about what differentiation is. And I wanted to highlight that it is something that takes practice and it is something that takes commitment. And I honestly can't remember why I thought of dance, but I do remember that it popped into my head, and I thought I want to weave this through. I really want a clear metaphor to get teachers to understand what differentiation is. And so, because I mean, I've been to so many professional learning where, someone will get up and talk about differentiation, and this is how you differentiate, and this is what it is. And then you leave the professional learning and you never really care and you never really do anything. And so I wanted to weave this idea of this metaphor of dance so that it was just a common thread throughout the book, that there are going to be times when you can dance really well, or there's going to be times where you fall down in the dance of differentiation and, get back up and try again. Or we know that, in many dances, you need a partner. So get some support from other people to help you with that dance of differentiation. So I guess it was a way to highlight that, differentiation isn't as scary as it looks. While many of us have been to professional learning where it's very much this au fait concept, that if it is clear what it actually is.
Hmm. And just, important to note that you, as someone who lives in Adelaide, says dance, and me, as someone in Melbourne, says dance. So, if I was
Yeah.
selling your book, The Dance of Differentiation, doesn't sound quite as good as the dance of
Oh, look, I'm
differentiation.
okay with
If I
that.
would enunciate properly, but anyway. But yeah, I'll just close it out by saying, like I said, a great book, is rigorous academically. The metaphor made it engaging and easy to read, and then the reflective activities at the end were very pick up and usable. So
Appreciate it.
if anyone's got any spare cash, I'd recommend giving it a look. Any final thoughts as we end it here?
Yeah, I guess, if you're looking for a book that not only just supports you as a teacher, but that you want to use as a team, it's designed to not just help you as an individual, but it's something that you could use with a team and go on a journey together and support each other, and something that you could give to your leadership team so that they know how they can support you. Because differentiation, while it's a classroom thing, you can't do it alone. You need to have good structure in the school to be able to do it. And willingness from people to be able to assist. So that's how we get good buy-in and good and helping other people become good differentiators. So it's a book that's not just designed for the individual, but it's designed to work together in professional learning communities.
Yeah, if I had it back in the day when that was my job, I could see myself doing a lot of printouts on the photocopier. Let's do this one together. Tom, thanks so much for your time. It's been great.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers.